These eight colorful guys are what Jehovah's Witnesses call the faithful and discreet slave. If you ask them why they're called that, they'll happily tell you that you can find the term in your very own Bible. And they'll direct you to the words of Jesus himself to his disciples, directly prophesying the faithful and discreet slave. They'll say something like, to answer that question, let's go to Matthew chapter 24, verse 45. Let's play along. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give him their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master, on coming, finds him doing so. Truly, I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. See, Jesus himself was asking the question, and what he meant was evidently that in the year 2022, 8 men in New York would be taking the lead amongst his people, providing food at the proper time, like these magazines and videos. That's the food. See, is spiritual food. You know what? I believe you. That verse is definitely talking about the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh, really? Because I kind of woke myself up there for a bit, but yeah, we agree. So you want a Bible study? Hold on there. Can we just keep reading the chapter you were reading to me, the rest of the chapter? The 24? Sure. But if ever that evil slave says in his heart, my master is delaying, and he starts to beat his fellow slaves and to eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know. And he will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his place with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and the gnashing of his teeth will be. What is that all about? Oh, well, yeah, but here it says if ever, like if ever the governing body turned evil, but that's obviously How would you know? I'm sorry? How would you know if this came true and the slave turned evil? That is the only question a Jehovah's Witness cannot answer. How would you know if the faithful and discreet slave turned into the evil slave? Well, at first look, it seems obvious, right? The Bible says that if the slave turned evil, he would beat his fellow slaves. But how would that look like in reality? Well, given that the slave isn't a literal one-person slave, we could safely assume that the beating isn't necessarily literal physical abuse either. And there are other ways of beating someone. In very general terms, you can also hurt someone financially, sexually, or mentally. Let's see if any of them could apply to the faithful slave. Financial abuse is when someone controls a victim's ability to get, spend, or maintain financial resources. Now, I could argue that the governing body already did this by dissuading every single generation of Jehovah's Witnesses from attending higher education, telling them that there wouldn't be any time to graduate before the end. But that's old light, and we know Armageddon is definitely coming in our lifetime, so we don't need to worry about that. Instead, let me show you new light. This is a morning worship that came out just a few months ago. In here, Jeffrey Jackson, member of the governing body, talks about Paul and how Paul handled monetary issues. Let's listen in.
Let's take, for example, the Apostle Paul. If you'd like to take your Bibles and turn with me to Galatians chapter 2. So when we think about that, we see how the Apostle Paul did apply this admonition in his ministry. His third missionary tour, which took place between the years of 52 to 56 CE, were involved with collecting contributions and donations from the brothers to take back for the poor brothers in Judea who had a very hard time at that particular period of time.
Here he's talking about something Paul did in the Bible. Once he saw the brothers in the congregations in Judea or Jerusalem were in poverty, he asked the brothers in Corinth who were wealthy to donate part of their money to their brothers in Judea. Jeff then reads out how Paul indicated this should be done, how the donations were to be collected ahead of time and whatnot. Finally, he reads the portion of the Bible where Paul even pauses his missionary work to help deliver that money because helping the poor was such an important thing to him. And then he goes one step further and tells us what Paul thought.
But were these gifts that they were taking just a matter of charity, giving out freely to others? Well, let's look again in the scriptures, this time to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verses 13 through 15. And this gives us a reason, we could say, for the policy or the viewpoint that the governing body has with regard to helping others. So 2 Corinthians 8, 13 through 15. For I do not want to make it easy for others, but difficult for you, but that by means of an equalizing, your surplus at the present time might offset their need, so that their surplus might also offset your deficiency, that there may be an equalizing. Just as it is written, the person with much did not have too much, and the person with little did not have too little.
So, let's recap. The brothers in Jerusalem need money. The brothers in Corinth have money. Paul tells the brothers in Corinth, give me some of your money, and I'll give it to the brothers in Jerusalem because they don't have any. That way you don't have too much, and they don't have too little. Pretty easy to follow, right? The lesson is pretty simple. Paul thought people with money should help the poor, and he got involved in making that happen. Except, that's not the lesson Jeff wants you to take.
What's the principle here? The principle is that even though these contributions were being given to poor brothers and sisters, everyone had to do something. It wasn't just a charity where you gave money to the poor, but rather there was an expectation that each person, whether they were poor or they had more, would do something towards the situation. And that's exactly the view the governing body takes today.
What? How do you know that? Where is that? Where is that verse that says the poor had to do something? What did the poor have to do, Jeff? But it gets worse.
Yes, Bibles and Bible literature are provided free of charge without cost to our brothers in all parts of the earth. And the brothers then donate according to their means. Kingdom halls are being built in many countries that can't afford to build kingdom halls. And yet again, the governing body allows the opportunity for the brothers in those countries to also donate toward the construction of kingdom halls. Why? Christendom would probably say, well, these are poor people, let's just make it a charity. But you see, Jesus didn't stop the widow from putting the 2 coins in, did he?
Yeah, just blame Christendom for not getting the very simple message that you clearly did not get. Let's be clear here. Paul did not send money to build kingdom halls. He sent money so the poor could cover the basic necessities of life. He was organizing this process, but he didn't take any money for himself. In fact, he never took any money from Christians for himself. In Acts, we learn he was a tent maker by trade, and in his second letter of the Thessalonians, he tells us why.
For you yourselves know how you should imitate us, because we did not behave in a disorderly way among you, nor did we eat anyone's food free. On the contrary, by labor and toil we were working night and day so as not to impose an expensive burden on any one of you.
Paul really did not want to be a burden to anyone, so he worked day and night making tents to support himself. How does Jeffrey Jackson, Tony Morris, and the rest of the governing body support themselves? Have they ever done what Paul did and established an equalizing program between rich and poor congregations? Jeffrey Jackson isn't just making it very clear that they will never follow Paul's example to support themselves and donate to the poor. He's twisting the Bible to make it say that donating is really about donating to them. Forget about the Good Samaritan being literally about a man giving a man with different beliefs the practical help he needed. Forget about all the times Jesus had to donate your money to the poor. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, you know your donations go to one place and one place only, to jw.org. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you're one of the lucky ones. You have access to the internet. But you know this speech was heard by the whole worldwide brotherhood. Brothers would have to travel long distances just to be somewhere they could get internet data to get to jw.org. These are the people Jeffrey Jackson is claiming to help by telling them not to build a house, not to build a hospital, but a kingdom hall. A kingdom hall that they have to pay for, they have to care for, but the governing body gets to sell at any point and keep the earnings, regardless of whether or not the hall is already paid up. Based on what Jeff read to us about Paul, how do you think Paul would react if he was here to see this?
Accept that the Jehovah's Witness organization has a problem with child abuse amongst its members?
I accept that child abuse is a problem right throughout the community, and it's something that we've had to deal with as well.
This is, again, governing body member Jeffrey Jackson, this time admitting to the Australian Royal Commission that the Jehovah's Witnesses have a problem with child sex abuse. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses' child abuse isn't about some bad elders here and there sexually abusing someone. It's how the Watchtower handles it. Jeffrey Jackson testified to the Australian Royal Commission in 2015 after 2 female sex abuse victims came forward with their stories. The commission then forced the Watchtower Society to release the information they kept on any child sex abusers in Australia. The result? Over 5,000 documents detailing 1,006 cases of child abuse since the 50s. And not one had been reported to the police. At best, they had been disfellowshipped, releasing them into the world without caring what these monsters could do to their neighbor. At worst, they had been kept in the congregation, forcing their victims to share the hall with the monster who had abused them every meeting for years. Anyone who wanted to report the incident to the police was immediately encouraged not to drag Jehovah's name through the mud and forgive and leave matters in Jehovah's hands. And that's not just a problem in Australia. In 2018, a jury in Montana broke new ground by awarding $35 million to a victim of sexual abuse after a trial where, among other things, governing body member Garrett Lodge refused to testify, writing, in part, "I do not answer to Watchtower, and Watchtower does not have and never has had any authority over me." Now, I don't know about you, but I can't come up with a reason for the faithful and discreet slave to not report sexual abusers to the authorities to keep both their flock and the neighbor safe. However, for an evil slave, that would be completely on character. Not only because you can make sure any sexual abuser has as much room to reach as many children as possible, but because of the sheer scale of the abuse. Let's do a quick maths to figure this out. We know that by the 1950s, there were 3,774 publishers in Australia. We know that now there are 67,700. Now, let's assume this set of Jehovah's Witnesses is a completely new set of Jehovah's Witnesses. And you know what? Let's bulk up the numbers. Let's add the number of publishers in 1983 and assume none of those publishers were either counting on 1950 nor in 2015. Now, we have 3 generations of Jehovah's Witnesses totaling 105,456 publishers. With these generous numbers, almost 1 out of every 100 Australian Jehovah's Witness is a known child abuser. If you're a Jehovah's Witness in Australia and you only know 2 congregations worth of Jehovah's Witnesses, you've statistically met either 1 or 2 people who are child abusers in secret. And that is just based on the information we have from Australia alone. Extrapolating those numbers, we can get a glimpse into the horrors of CSA cases. Based on Australian numbers, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you've already met a pedophile, and the Watchtower is keeping them a secret in the congregation. If you have children, would you roll that dice every time they're assigned to preach with someone? The governing body certainly thinks you should. This one is the easiest to prove. I don't even need to look into doctrine or legal stuff. I don't need to open the Bible. This time, I just need to point to you. Because if you're a Jehovah's Witness like I was, and you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you're suffering mentally right now. And if you are, I just want you to stop and consider why. I would say it's because people have been telling you that there is nothing more poisonous, more dangerous than apostates. You're taught to never ever listen not only to apostates, but anyone who offers criticism, as David Splain sneaks in here.
And some who aren't really apostates can cause just as much trouble as the apostates do by their negative talk and criticism.
But is that what the Bible teaches, or what David's Blaine teaches? Galatians chapter 1, verse 8 and 9 makes it very clear that even the words coming from angels or from Paul himself should be carefully scrutinized. Paul even congratulated the Bereans for doing just that. Why? Because Paul wanted people to challenge him and anyone else, because he believed that it was the only way to ensure everyone remained in the faith. After all, Jesus had prophesied how the Holy Spirit would help him and everyone else. It didn't matter if disagreements arose. Paul believed that as long as Christians stayed close to the Bible, the Spirit of truth would prevail over any disagreement. As long as they had the Spirit of truth, they couldn't fail. And this would obviously be a huge issue if, say, you were the evil slave, because there's no Spirit of truth to guide you, but you already have followers waiting for you to tell them how to interpret the Bible. So what do? You guess. But the thing about guessing is that you'll get things wrong sometimes. And as soon as you get something wrong, you'll risk followers realizing that the Spirit of truth isn't guiding you. But you have a trick up your sleeve. If you were really smart, you could probably rewrite some random proverb that talks about being righteous, and you can change the meaning to mean mistakes are okay because of new light. And sure, it's a proverb, not a prophecy, and it has nothing to do with understanding Bible prophecy. But hey, as long as no one looks too closely at what Jesus actually said about the Spirit of truth, you'll be fine. Because if anyone dares to question you, if anyone dares to even hint at the very clear contradiction, you banish them. You call them apostates. You call them mentally diseased. And then, to make sure they can't warn others, you tell your followers to never talk to them again. It doesn't matter if it's their friend. It doesn't matter if it's their spouse. It doesn't matter if it's their teenage daughter. Your followers don't talk to them. What are they going to do? Tell you that there's no biblical reason to completely shun anyone? You'll tell them they're wrong and you'll shun them too. Then, you'll twist the Bible to make sure your followers are not only against any sort of criticism against a religion, but to make them too afraid to even listen to criticism.
We are not so strong, so spiritual, so intelligent, that we can't be affected by the poison of apostate ideas.
And once you're teaching that fellow Christians, the Bible, or even time, can't prove you wrong, then you can make the Bible say anything you want it to say. You can say the Bible is against birthdays or beards. You can live off of them while at the same time saying you're imitating Paul. You can use the Bible to say your followers should follow you blindly forever. You can create a whole system of made-up beliefs to oppress them, to remove their individuality, and to cover up your fellow abusers. And most important of all, you can make sure no one can ever call you the evil slave without being promptly silenced and shunned. And if you think, hey, that's not what's happening right now, I have one question for you. How would you know?
Does the governing body know when Armageddon is going to come? Yes, we do.